Hello from your favorite Grasslands PR team. This week, we are back with another reason why these overlooked and underappreciated ecosystems are objectively the best biome. I'm Rachel.
And I'm Nicole. And today, we're talking about Madagascar.
Finally!
And some of its lovely grasslands that it has.
Oh, I'm so excited. Somebody requested this a while back who
Yes.
actually did research in Madagascar, and I did not know until that very moment that there even were grasslands on Madagascar. I assumed it was all just tropical lemur habitat.
One of our OG Grassland groupie fans, Brandon, suggested this one. So, much love to you, Brandon. You're lovely. But yeah, he actually did research on Madagascar with the lemurs, and now he has the lovely PhD to prove just how much he loves this island. So
Hey.
I hope that the long-awaited Madagascar episode lives up to the hype.
Oh, I'm so hyped for this. Before we do that, I guess some quick news. Just as a reminder, we are doing every other week right now for the podcast. We've just got a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes over here, and you know how it goes. So we'll be back to our regular every week schedule fairly soon, we hope. But we're just trying to make sure we continue producing stuff that we think is good and not rushing out episodes just to keep up with our schedule. So thanks for your patience, guys. And is there anything else, Nicole?
I don't think so. Congrats to Brandon for the PhD. What an awesome accomplishment. I'm just saying that. And to everyone else that graduated this year, maybe you didn't get as much fanfare as usual. You're awesome. You're doing good stuff.
All right. I want to hear about Madagascar.
Well, good, because I want to talk about Madagascar. Like you said, whenever people picture Madagascar, they really just picture these lush forests, a ton of different lemurs, and that's really, really cool.
Isn't Madagascar where the vanilla orchid comes from?
There's a ton of different orchids, but I don't know for sure if vanilla is from there. I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, that's like the kind of habitat I picture is like epiphytic plants on rainforest style trees with like orchids and all kinds of other very jungly stuff.
Yes, absolutely. And, it's the fourth largest island in the world. It's pretty well explored. We know a lot about it. But it's really only recently, and by recently I mean like the last 5 years, that people started to realize, 65 to 80% of this place is covered in grasslands. What's going on there? Why is there so much grasslands here?
60 to 70%?
Yes.
Oh my God. What is this nonsense grassland erasure? I'm kind of upset now. We're going to correct this. Holy shit.
You should be upset. But real quick, just to kind of set the scene, I want to talk about Madagascar's climate. This is all very vague and overarching. Madagascar is an island, so it has a lot of really interesting things going on with it, with a lot of ocean winds blowing in, warm or cold air. So it has a lot of smaller ecosystems within the island, but in general, the east coast of Madagascar is going to be pretty wet. That's going to be where all those really lush rainforests with all the beautiful orchids are going to be, and all of those fun lemurs. So it can get up to like 150 inches of rain, which is like 3,800 millimeters of rain each year due to all these strong ocean currents. And on the opposite side of the island, southwest kind of corner of it, it's very much a desert with only about 14 inches of rain or 1,000 millimeters.
Whoa, that gradient though. That's crazy.
Insane.
Did you say how big the island is?
I was going to ask you. Do you know how big Madagascar is? It is the fourth largest island, and I've always kind of known that fact, but I didn't realize quite how big it was. Really?
Well, okay. It's hard, as you know now, I have absolutely no sense of scale or surface area or whatever. Mm-hmm. And our world maps are very, skewed because of our attempt to make them into rectangles.
Yeah.
So picturing it off the coast of Africa isn't really much of a sense of the real true scale of this island compared to other islands on the planet. So
yes, especially since Africa is so big.
I'm going to say it's as big as Texas.
Oh, it is so much bigger than Texas.
Oh, you're kidding me. I thought that was an overestimate.
No.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so I got on Google Maps and I started just I measured how long Madagascar is, because it's a pretty, it's much longer north-south than it is wide east-west. It's about 950 miles long, north to south. So,
okay.
For a frame of reference, I got you. That's Wichita, Kansas to Las Vegas.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That's a lot of miles.
Yes. I then zoomed around on planet Earth and I found some another frame of reference for non-Kansas people. It's Lisbon, Portugal to Geneva, Switzerland. So, it's a big island.
Yeah. Wow.
Just very, very large. And so, like I said, it has a lot of those kind of little microclimates, and the northern part of the island does have a mountain range in it, which also creates this kind of rain shadow effect where the middle of the island actually is fairly dry. So the coasts are going to have a lot of forests and things like that, and in the middle of the island is in what, is called a rain shadow. We learned about them last week at Dig Arboretum's amazing Earth Partnerships for School program. Oh my gosh. And it's very mountainous, it's very dry, and this is where we find a lot of the grasslands in Madagascar. Depending on what source you are reading, these grasslands are often just called forests.
Oh, I'm so mad. Are they savannas?
They are savannas.
Okay.
They can be heavily treed, but then there's also a lot of portions of it, if you Google Madagascar subhumid forests, so subhumid, aka not quite humid forests, you will pull up a picture that is this little kind of farmstead looking house with 3 trees and then just a huge expanse of grass. And that is the picture that they're using to describe this subhumid forest, and I'm just
oh wow
angry about it.
There's this little riparian, is that even the correct a river riverine photograph too, where it's literally just a grassland with a few trees, not even a big riparian zone or anything with trees in it. It's just it's just a grassland with some trees.
Yeah.
Oh god, that's so frustrating.
It's so frustrating. And if you kind of want to Google some other pictures.
God. Oh, go ahead. Oh, I'm so sorry. I just saw another one that literally looks like Africa. I mean, it is Africa, but it just looks like an African savanna. It's got those almost acacia profiled trees.
Yeah.
And it's from One Earth. It's their image for the Madagascar subhumid forests. Holy Nicole,
isn't that insane?
I'm enraged.
Yeah.
So cool. Okay, sorry, continue.
No, I wanted to get you mad, so it worked.
It's not hard.
But yeah, and so sometimes you will find literature that calls them savannas or open canopy forests, but a lot of times they're just called subhumid forests, and
gotcha.
That seems like that's kind of an older term, and the more recent literature is calling it savannas and acknowledging that they are a grassland ecotype. So that's super nice. This area is also called the Central Highlands. But again, if you search Central Highlands, you get a lot of information about how it's a forest, and it's just very sad. But that is why we are here today, to set the record straight.
Yay!
Are you ready?
Oh, I've been ready. Let's go.
Okay, so like I said, especially a lot of the older literature, they call all of these grasslands forests. More recent research is saying, no, they're definitely grasslands. They are different. But just in general, there is a ton of controversy, not just over, is it a grassland or not, but are they natural or not.
Ooh.
So
Ooh, this is what I'm here for.
Yes.
Ooh, this is exciting.
So 2016, there's a paper called Madagascar's Grasses and Grasslands, Anthropogenic or Natural. And it's a really, really good paper. And it's just kind of tackling, is it natural? Is it human-made? Because as we know, a lot of grasslands are often used for agriculture, for grazing, things like that. So sometimes it can be kind of hard to untangle, which one came first. Mm-hmm. And from 2016 to, I even found some papers that were published like this year, it's been hit really hard trying to figure out exactly what is going on with these grasslands. And, just like other grasslands, the Madagascar grasslands very much thrive on disturbances, and especially grazing is used a lot today. One of the kind of interesting points that are brought up is that we don't really know, if these grasslands predate humans, which is what a lot of the more recent literature shows or suggests, I guess.
It suggests that they do predate humans?
Yes, they do predate humans.
Okay.
So we're there before humans. What was on this island that was grazing the grasslands to keep them there? Because if there were no grazers, this grassland is completely, surrounded by forest. The forest should have taken over if it's a natural grassland that was there before humans and before the cattle that we, brought to the grasslands.
Right.
And really, we don't quite know. There is ancient animals like some large tortoises and an extinct species of pygmy hippo that were definitely grazers, but it's hard to say exactly, how much they ate, how many there were, things like that. Were just these two groups of animals, hippos and tortoises, were they enough to create these grasslands and to keep them there until, we brought grazers over of our own as those animals died off? Kind of an interesting question.
Yeah.
And this study in particular, this 2016 study, found that, like I said, the Madagascar grasslands do predate humans, and they are extremely, extremely unique. And they have an insane amount of grass species. There are 541 species of grasses found on Madagascar that we know of right now.
Wow.
216 of those grass species are found nowhere else.
That's crazy. Geologically, like real quick, just to, set the stage a little bit, it's similar to Africa the most, right? Or do they share geologic history with other places? Like, are the weird grasses like most related to other African grasses?
The ones that are not endemic, so aka found nowhere else, are very much African grasses. Yes.
Cool.
And so, that's 40% of the total grass species are endemic and therefore found nowhere else. And
wow.
For that to happen, it pretty strongly suggests that these grasslands are natural. Even if we don't quite know what those grazers could have been in the past, for there to be that many unique species that are found literally nowhere else, it pretty heavily suggests that these are in true natural wonder and they are worthy of our, conservation and admiration.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That is so insane. Like the divergences must go back so far for them to have diverged that much. And for them to have, had enough ecological diversity to split up into so many different types of grasses. Like, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Move over, Madagascar orchids. We've got some grasses that need conservation and are perfectly valid.
Yes, I love it. Oh, gosh.
I'm not joking.
Oh, no. I am very much aware.
Well, I just needed our listeners to understand that.
Yes, that's fair.
Yeah, no, this is incredible.
This 2016 paper, they very much admitted, hey, we don't really know how much grass those ancient megafauna ate, but there is some suggestion that fire definitely played a big role in these ecosystems, and that is how they persisted. just natural fires that would sweep across and keep the trees at bay. So
that checks out. Because there has to be some kind of disturbance. And if it's not grazers, or at least the grazers aren't in a significant number to like provide that level of disturbance, fire's like the obvious next bet.
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting that, at least in the past, fire played such a big role in this ecosystem. And maybe that's why there are so many unique grasses, because, different kinds of grasses will react differently to different kinds of management strategies. I'm going to reference Dick Arboretum again because I love them and they're just on my mind because we were just there. But, Brad Gurr at Dick Arboretum mentioned that their prairie restoration plots, they can't just mow or just burn because they won't have the same diversity of grasses. So they have a 3-year management strategy where 1 year is fire, 1 year is mowing, which is essentially, simulated grazing. And then 1 year, they just let it sit and just kind of recover. So it's interesting that, the American prairies really need both in order to be as diverse as possible. And then these Madagascar grasslands kind of maybe had more of a fire background versus grazing, which is what they're getting now. And it'll be interesting, going forward, now that we are doing more research into these grasslands, to see how they change over time with more of a, grazing pressure versus a fire pressure, which there is still fire used, but I don't think it's used as much as the grazing.
Right, yeah. So that's completely changing the level of competition and the style of competition within those grasses.
Yes.
If they've evolved over time to take advantage of the fire disturbances. And that's so interesting. Huh.
Yeah, and that's just me. Like, there's not really any research on that particular part,
I know.
But I think it's cool.
Yeah, that was like my fear too, because, asking these questions is really important, but I know that they are questions in particular because, as you started out pointing out, they really haven't even classified these ecosystems as grasslands until somewhat recently.
Yeah.
So they're not really studying them from that perspective if they are studying them. Yes. Or I'm assuming that they aren't, yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'll go into more detail about some of this controversy because it's pretty interesting. And the same lead researcher of this Anthropogenic or Natural 2016 paper has also put forth papers just this year in 2021 detailing some future research that they want to do, but it's behind a paywall, so I can't access it. So that's great.
You didn't use Sci-Hub?
No, it didn't work.
Aw, dang.
I know.
Okay. I hate it when that happens.
I was very sad. So, did not work. I thought about emailing them, but, it's okay. Maybe one day.
Yeah, and tweet them.
Yes. And this published paper that they just did in 2021 was actually in direct response to another paper in 2021, which was also behind a paywall, but it was called Seeing the Forest for the Trees and the Grasses, Revisiting the Evidence for Grazer-Maintained Grasslands in Madagascar's Central Highlands. And it sounds so good, but I can't access it, so very sad.
Ugh, that's incredibly unfortunate.
I know. So, if you have some way to find those papers, let me know. I'd love to read them. But anyways.
Taking notes in my brain that we need to tweet them immediately after this episode.
But anyway, like I said, there's a lot of really cool research that's all pretty recent. I found another paper in 2020 called Fire and Grazing Determined Grasslands of Central Madagascar Represent Ancient Assemblages. So obviously, it's pro-grassland. And
did you say determinative?
Determined grasslands of central.
Oh, okay. I was just making sure I didn't need to get a term defined that I hadn't heard before. Okay, cool.
Yeah. There's some good ones, but I tried to omit them as much as possible.
Neat.
But this paper was in 2020. It had super extensive grass sampling. So did our 2016 paper, which I think is really interesting that these more recent papers aren't just relying on old data. They are actually like going out in the field, collecting their own data, and then, extrapolating from there. I think that's super, super cool. And I guess it's almost needed since in the past, these grasslands weren't even considered grasslands.
Yeah.
But it's still really cool. But they support this ancient lineage of Malagasy grasslands and put forth a really desperate cry for conservation. The last bit of the discussion kind of sums this up really well, so I'm just going to do a direct quote. In Madagascar, grasslands are dismissed as wastelands in need of forest restoration. The most commonly planted trees are exotic eucalyptus, acacia, and pinus species. Species known as invasive elsewhere in the world. There is a clear need for science to engage with regions hitherto dismissed as being of no value for the sake of future conservation, land management, and livelihoods.
Wow.
It's just so good. Like, not only are these grasslands, considered just degraded forests, we're actually actively planting trees to take them over, and they're not even native trees.
Oh, that's infuriating. Oh, no.
I know. And I found another study in 2018. God. This one, so I don't know how to pronounce their name. I'm going to try really hard. Solofondranohatra, maybe. But they did this 2018 study and the 2020 study that I just mentioned. And this 2018 study compared different sites along the central highlands of Madagascar. So this, very elevated, dry area. And they were trying to split out the grasslands from savannas, from forests. And they did find that, the forests had significantly different plant communities than what we are now classifying as savannas. Different, not just different trees, but also, a lot of different grasses and forbs and things like that. So this very much supports that it's not just a degraded forest. It is a savanna, and it's unique, and it is very much overlooked. And admittedly, this, like I said, this person did both of these papers, and pretty much all of their recent papers are pro-grassland papers that take place in Madagascar, so perhaps there's a slight bias. But I support it.
Grasslands?
Yeah.
Well, that's what we need, it sounds like, because that's, been the blind spot for, ecological efforts on the island, so.
Absolutely. Yeah. So now that we talked about all the pro-grasslands papers, I have to, touch on the anti-grassland papers a little bit. But something interesting to note is a lot of them are very old. So this first one is a 1996 paper titled Deforestation and Its Effects in Highland Madagascar, and it's by Gade. The first sentence of the introduction, are you ready for this?
I'm ready, let's go.
Okay. And I quote, "The highlands of Madagascar form one of the bleakest landscapes in the non-arid tropics, devoid of native trees or animals, scarred by relentless erosion, and covered in floristically impoverished grasses."
Floristically impoverished? Why did they have to go after the grassland so hard?
I don't know.
Jesus. But that was completely uncalled for and completely just biologically untrue, ecologically untrue, and infuriating as a grasslander to hear just such blatant disregard for an important ecosystem.
Yeah.
Not even disregard, like that's like active, like
hate,
vehement aggression.
Vitriol.
Vitriol, thank you.
Yeah. No. And it's so interesting, though, because people are passionate about this, that these grasslands are degraded forests and they're destroying Madagascar. Like, this is what is actually taught in schools, like, in Madagascar, apparently. I'm not from Madagascar, but I read that on multiple different sites, that this is the common thought and the common, frame of mind that we're using to do, conservation on Madagascar, that these grasslands are completely human-made and there's nothing there. They're ugly. they're one of the bleakest landscapes in the non-arid tropics. Like, what a statement.
Yeah. And I think, okay, so I'm going to like scale back a little bit of like my intensity in reaction to their intensity because there is a narrative that, you know, maybe wasn't based on any kind of science that was done, that those grasslands were human-made. And from that framework, I guess it does make sense to say that, hey, this is a degraded ecosystem and it really needs to be restored to a forest. But now that we know better, that's where we need to come in now and like sort of change that perspective around. Because the perspective that they had against the grasslands is valid if viewed from the framework of what we thought was true of those ecosystems.
Yes, that is
It's
fair.
just not valid because the premise is not true. And these are ecologically diverse, unique ecosystems that have a valid presence in Madagascar that, you know, we have only barely begun to understand. And it may be, you know, I think Madagascar has a history of some pretty intense extinctions, right, of their endemic fauna. Yeah. So it may be that a lot of the animals that used those grasslands historically are not as present anymore or have gone extinct. So maybe it's harder to see for those reasons the ecological benefit of the grasslands. And that makes sense. But, you know, now that we know better, let's fix the narrative.
Yes.
Use that lens to do better.
Yeah, and that is something that I was thinking about was when we think of endemics, so species found nowhere else, on Madagascar, a lot of times we talk about the animals, which is fine. We can talk about animals. And we think about the endemics that live in the forests on the edge of Madagascar and how they don't have a lot of space to go. So as, you know, these grasslands maybe are expanding because of human settlement, we now are losing those forests. And then we're losing those species. But I do wonder, you mentioned, you know, a lot of the grassland animals absolutely could have been erased since human settlement as well. So it's harder to appreciate them because the grasslands don't have as many endemic species as these like really weirdly biodiverse hotspots that are the forests of Madagascar.
Right.
It's kind of unfair to compare what is a degraded grassland to these forests that are insanely rich in biodiversity, but that's okay.
Yeah. More research is needed.
Yeah.
That's, you know, just the answer, you know?
Absolutely.
And it's exciting, and I hope that folks in Madagascar who are interested in the ecology of their island and the protection of their endemic natural resources, I hope that they start to feel that the grasslands may also be a source of, you know, that pride that they have for their forests too and those endemic species.
Yeah, absolutely. We're not saying that the forests aren't important. It's just the grasslands also are too. But yeah, so that paper, I unfortunately could not access the whole thing, but just the passion in it that came across just like the small portion that I could read was very startling. And then there's one more recent paper that I found that was actually published in May of 2021 by Joseph and Seymour, and it was titled The Unlikely Antiquity of Madagascar's Grasslands. And they bring to question, again, the age of these grasslands and are specifically criticizing a paper in 2008 by Bond, which was called The Antiquity of Madagascar's Grasslands. So literally a direct critique of this specific paper, which I found a lot of these while I was researching this because, again, tensions are high. Like, people have a lot of feelings about these grasslands on both sides. Are they degraded forests? Have they always been here? Are they human-made? There's a lot of feelings wrapped up in this, and a lot of the papers use very, like, emotional language. They're not written, like, they're written scientifically, but I think it's interesting. Like, I've never read so many papers, like, back to back to back that were filled with, like, emotional language and filled with I don't know, just like a more laid back writing style versus like, you know, what we think of scientific papers being, where they're all really boring with a bunch of graphs.
Inaccessible language, scientific words. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, just that one opening sentence or paragraph, whatever that you read was... It was very surprising how emotionally charged it was. Like, I've never really read a scientific paper that was that... Like, it sounded like an op-ed.
Yeah.
And not a scientific paper. Like, I've certainly read a lot of scientific papers that have really emotional pleas, but usually it's like in the discussion portion where they're like, wow, this ecosystem is so wonderful, and this is why my work is important, and not like the premises.
Yeah, it's rough.
Yeah, and that's like not supposed to be like it's a good critique of that, but I guess I'm not trying to say that like these scientists are all like completely unprofessional or something. It does show that they have a lot of passion for these ecosystems. I just hope that passion doesn't get in the way of understanding the new sciences that are coming out about currently unvalued ecosystems.
Yes. But yeah, this 2021 paper by Joseph and Seymour, like I said, calls into question this specific 2008 paper. And they mention that a lot of recent studies and papers coming out reference this Bond 2008 paper, which is a really good critique, because if everyone is using, you know, one paper as kind of a jumping off point for this research, that can lead to not super great science. But like I said earlier, a lot of the papers that I was reading, if they did mention Bond, it was kind of in passing. They weren't basing their research necessarily off of that. Like, they were actually going out into the field, collecting their own data, and then drawing conclusions from that. So I think that critique is a little And they did mention that, you know, the fossil record there doesn't show a lot of those big herbivores that we would expect to have with grasslands, like I mentioned earlier. Really, it was just hippos and tortoises. Did they have the power to shape their environment that much? We probably will really never know. Tortoises do eat a lot of food. If they're awake, they're pretty much grazing. And hippos are the same way. They're big animals, so they need a lot of food. But was it enough to make a grassland? Who knows? And maybe and there's savannas too. Like, it's not like it's a grassland devoid of trees in most of Madagascar. It is a savanna, and there's lots of trees. So, you know, maybe it was the fires that kind of worked together with these grazers. Who knows? But I did appreciate that there are some critiques out there, and they're definitely worthy of reading. But I don't know. I also saw that the Joseph and Seymour paper mentioned that, you know, many of the grasses in the 2008 paper were lumped as grassland dependent, and Joseph and Seymour said that they're really forest dependent. But I feel like maybe this criticism kind of comes more from the fuzzy line of what the heck even is a grassland, and if it has trees, it's not a grassland. Like,
right, yeah.
Because other papers have shown that the savannas have different grasses than the true forests. So, I don't know.
Yeah, right. Maybe this is a sign that the scientific community needs to be better at defining those open grassland ecosystems that have trees. Yeah. And, you know, because that, even for us with grassland groupies, has been a little bit of a struggle. And it's fortunate for us that we've encountered, you know, mostly so far sources where they recognize the difference between like an open woodland and a true forest, where, like, you know, maybe they call it an open woodland, but they're very clearly distinguishing it as like a grassland habitat type or a savanna, even if they're not quite using the same language as other sources. But man, like Madagascar is having some problems here with their definitions. Yeah. Just
a little bit. And there was a bunch of other papers that I found, but I don't want to bore you with like too many case studies, but it's insane. So obviously these grasslands of Madagascar are the center of some debate. Just a little bit. And I feel like there's more evidence pointing towards them being ancient, natural grasslands than not, especially since a lot of the more recent research is supporting this. Because as we know, science evolves and it changes, and we change our mind all the time. It's one of the coolest things about science. And so it still breaks my heart that so many websites and so many, papers really just call them wastelands, useful only for agriculture. Even the World Wildlife Fund has a page. It is called Central Madagascar. And it talks about how the scattered forests here are in need of saving. The first sentence on this page reads, and I quote, "This ecoregion contains a large number of endemic species found in the remaining forest patches and also in some of the wetland areas. But the remaining habitats are highly fragmented and surrounded by a sea of anthropogenic grasslands and agricultural areas that have almost no biological value."
World Wildlife Fund! I am disappointed. Oh, can we lodge a complaint?
We're just gonna tweet them with this episode.
Oh, please. Yeah. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Relentlessly tweet about Madagascar grasslands.
Yes.
Shit, dude. That's crazy.
Yeah. Seriously, though. They mention, super offhand that there is some debate over how much of the grasslands are natural or human-made, but then they continue to only talk about the forests in this region that are in need of saving and are in, danger. So it's very, very sad. And I will also say that the most recent citation for this page is also 2000.
No way. Okay.
Yeah. So again, it's kind of all of these resources that are using older data see these grasslands as degraded forests and really not much else.
Okay, so we just need to get people to update their science.
Yes. But yeah. And it's weird because 2000 doesn't feel that long ago, but it is 2021.
Yep, that was a while ago.
Yeah. And especially as far as science is concerned, 5 years sometimes can be almost too old to reference. So, yeah, World Wildlife Fund. They also had the really old page on Saiga antelope too. So they need someone to just redo the whole website, but that is a huge undertaking because wow, do they have very specific pages available, a page on the central region of Madagascar.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that they have so much information on their website, and they are a really awesome organization. Don't get me wrong, but I got some bones to pick.
Yeah, well, and how are they supposed to know if they don't get some really enthusiastic grasslanders who probe them with the new science about their outdated websites? Yeah. Given their premise about the importance of Madagascar's Central Highlands, they probably aren't prioritizing looking up new information about it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and they even mention, lots of endemics live here, but apparently only in the few scattered forests.
Only in the few scattered, yeah.
These Madagascar grasslands, a lot of them are savannas. Savannas are grasslands. Mm-hmm. Savannas are grasslands with trees in them.
Right.
Okay.
Established.
I wanted to take a moment and let the trees have their moment of glory. And I was going to actually talk about a tree on the podcast.
Okay, great.
Which is we've said multiple times, F trees, etc., etc.
That was from an extreme prairie perspective, though, and we know better now.
It is
true for prairie environments for the most part, but not for grasslands as a whole.
Yes. So I'm going to talk about trees, and I'm actually really excited. I'm just being dramatic. I want to talk about baobabs.
Oh, are they on Madagascar too?
Yeah.
Fun. Okay.
So it's funny that you say that. Where do you think of them living?
Africa.
Yeah. There's one species of baobabs on Africa, the main continent.
Okay.
There are 6 endemic only to Madagascar.
Holy balls.
Yeah, like, again, just weird erasure of just random things on Madagascar while we praise the lemurs, which are cool. Don't come at me, Brandon. I know you love lemurs. But baobabs are so cool. And there's 6 of them that are endemic to Madagascar, 1 in Africa, and then 1 all the way in Australia. And we'll get to him in a second. He's kind of weird. But baobabs as a whole are just really, really fascinating and really cool trees. They really are kind of only found in a savanna kind of ecosystem. They really need space to grow and to spread because they are very large trees. So if you've never seen one, please Google a picture of one because they are just Seussian and don't look like they should exist. They have these giant engorged trunks. A lot of times it kind of looks like multiple trunks kind of spiraling around each other. And then their limbs are often completely leafless and just kind of almost look like roots up in the air. And there's actually a lot of really interesting like folklore surrounding this where apparently the baobab was kind of just thrust into the ground upside down. And like, I don't know. It has a lot of really cool cultural significance because most of it is edible. There's a lot of animals that use it. So in Africa, you'll find like elephants browsing actually not just on the leaves, but on the trunk itself. They will gouge out strips of the bark and chew on it to get the water from the bark because the baobab looks engorged because it is. It has tons of water inside of its trunk.
Wow.
Because it lives in these savannas that are extremely sunny and hot and dry. So the way it got around that is just to just engorge itself with water anytime it rains. And they actually will swell or kind of narrow in size depending on how much rain it's gotten recently, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, that's very cool.
This is also a super ancient lineage of trees, and they live for a super long time. They mature super, super slowly because, again, most of the year they don't even have leaves on them. So they can't grow if they don't have leaves because that's the part of the plant that is doing photosynthesis and producing food for it. And so they take at least about 20 years to reach maturity and start producing its first flowers that will then become fruit that are full of seeds so that it can spread. And those fruit are also extremely nutritious. They have tons of vitamin C and calcium in them. And then the nuts inside have, I believe, a lot of potassium. So it's like a superfood, both for animals and humans. And so it's just a really, really cool tree. And like I said, they get very, very large. One of the largest was actually the Sunland baobab in South Africa. It was a giant baobab that in 1993 was actually turned into a bar.
Oh, I think I saw an article about this.
It's fascinating because these trees, as they kind of grow and they expand outward, they will often end up with a hollow center on the inside. And that hollow center is often used by animals as shelter, but also, for people for shelter. It's used for making stables for horses, jail cells, or even tourist attractions like this bar. And this particular bar, it actually had 2 cavities inside of the baobab because this tree was absolutely gigantic. So the first cavity was like a proper bar with seats and, a place to order from, things like that. But then there was a tiny little kind of side channel that they stored all of the alcohol. It was like a naturally cooled cellar because of all of the airflow that was going through this tree. It was actually, I believe, it stayed about like 70 degrees Fahrenheit, 22 Celsius inside of this tree, whereas like outside it can be quite a bit hotter, which is really cool. And this tree was about 22 meters high, 72 feet, and 47 meters in circumference, 150 feet. So they are significantly wider than they all are tall. They tend to kind of reach a max height and then stop growing upwards and only grow outwards, so it can reach absolutely gigantic proportions. Unfortunately for the Sunland baobab, it actually split in 2017 and ended up falling. It's pretty natural for these trees to go through this because that hollow center eventually just won't be able to support it. But what's kind of interesting is that they think this tree was almost 2,000 years old. And while there might have been some excavation for the bar, for the most part, they left it kind of how they found it. It's not like they hollowed it out and, disrupted the integrity of the tree. It just kind of fell one day for no discernible reason. And there's a lot of other ancient baobabs around the world in the last 20 or so years that have met very similar fates. And all of them were extremely old, like over 1,000 years old. And for all of these trees to just suddenly start dying altogether like this is pretty alarming. And scientists don't really know why all of a sudden they're dying. The only real answer that they can come up with is climate change. And, I mean, it makes sense. But it's unfortunately one without a really good or easy solution.
Because we don't know what is causing it. Well, and if it's climate change related, I mean, that's hard enough for us to mitigate right now in general, let alone, not knowing which aspect of it is affecting them.
Yeah, it's having the answer of climate change is nice, but it's also like, oh, okay, you can't fix climate change overnight, unfortunately. So it doesn't have an easy solution. So we might end up losing a lot of our baobab trees. And these ancient ones are kind of like a canary in the gold mine kind of situation where, at least, thank goodness, people are paying attention to this and noticing this trend of all these really ancient trees just suddenly dying. And especially with a tree that takes 20 or even maybe 200 years in really dry climates to mature. It's not good that we're losing these really ancient ones.
Right, yeah. Oh, God.
Yeah.
Distressing.
A little bit. On a light note, I found an article by National Geographic on this, and it was called Africa's Oldest Trees Are Dying, and Scientists Are Stumped.
Wait, that's light... Oh, is it because it's a joke? It's a pun? Is that why it's lighthearted? That was not lighthearted, Nicole.
I know, I'm sorry. I tried.
Very poor taste. These poor baobabs.
I know.
I don't approve. I'm not laughing, I'm smiling, and I'm sad about it.
Aww. I'm so sorry.
Thanks. Wow. Well, I'm disappointed in you.
I'm so sorry. Okay, here's a better thing. There is an entire foundation that solely exists for baobab research and conservation. It's called the Baobab Foundation. So they're doing really good work. Yes. I found the Little Big Baobab book by Dr. Sarah Venter. It's just a little PDF that I found online. I think it was like 10 pages. Talks all about baobabs. Really, really well written. Has a lot of really, really cool pictures in it that I really couldn't find elsewhere. Like, there's a lot of like articles and like blog posts about baobabs, but this one was just super, super well put together. So we'll definitely include a link in the description because I really, really liked it. But they talked about how old they are to conserve because of their really, really slow maturity rates, and just the spiritual importance of these trees to so many different cultures has really kind of saved it in a way because it's not overexploited, because so many people do rely on this tree. They don't cut them down. They harvest the fruits, they eat that, or they might eat some of the bark, but this tree is actually really well adapted to bark disturbances. And whether it's a person or an elephant or what have you, whenever bark gets scraped off of a baobab, it just kind of heals up, which is unique. A lot of trees, if you scrape off their bark, it's pretty much a death sentence. They really can't recover from that. But the baobabs, a lot of their kind of twisting growth patterns is actually because of old injuries. So they just kind of split and kind of form like a new trunk whenever they have an injury like that. So kind of cool.
That's really cool.
Yeah. And I love that, you know, it's those primarily probably large grazers and things like elephants that led to that adaptation, but it's also super helpful for people too.
Yeah, totally.
And something that has kind of come to light with research for these guys is that, you know, they have these huge white flowers, but we don't know exactly what it is that's pollinating them. And without pollination, they won't produce seeds. They won't be able to, you know, reproduce and make new baobabs, and then we'll lose all of them. So it's kind of important to know what pollinates these flowers. And so there's a lot of research right now going on with that, especially with the ones on Madagascar, since there are so many very, you know, unique species that are on that island. Mm-hmm. There's actually a subspecies where there's 2 trees left. 2.
God, how old are they?
Pretty old. Over 1,000. With these trees, it's actually really, really hard to age them because you can't just like count the rings. You actually, because of the way that they grow and the way that they like react to, you know, damage to their bark, you have to actually like radiocarbon date them and use like a lot of like fancy molecular science and stuff that I don't understand. I don't know how that stuff works. You can't just count the tree rings. Plus, counting 1,000 tree rings would take a while. But they're really, really hard to date. And as such, again, baobabs are kind of left out of the conversation when we're talking about really, really old trees. If you search like oldest trees in the world, like a bunch of like aspens and trees that grow as like a colony pop up, and a lot of times the baobab is completely removed from that conversation. So kind of interesting.
That is interesting.
And sad.
Yeah. Wow, that's so sad because people love trees.
Yeah, right?
And like, why aren't you loving this one?
It sucks. But like I said, there's a lot of really cool pollinator research going on. So I mentioned they have giant white flowers. What kind of pollinators do you think they use if
Flies.
They have giant white flowers?
Flies?
Flies? Bats, yeah.
Okay. Flies is a good guess for a white flower.
Yeah. White flowers, you know, they're not obviously. A white flower is probably not attracting like birds or butterflies because birds and butterflies like really colorful flowers. But white flowers also tend to bloom at night. The baobabs does bloom at night. And that white flower is obviously going to stand out at night. So they're using a lot of nocturnal pollinators, which also makes it really hard to study because, you know, it's nighttime. We can't see at night. But specifically, a lot of bats have been shown to pollinate baobabs. And then also a lot of hawk moths, which are those like really, really big moths that when they're flying around during the day, they almost look like hummingbirds. So go moths.
Yeah. Go moths.
And those night blooming flowers only last maybe 12, 15 hours. And the tree will only produce a couple at a time, which again makes it super difficult to study what it is that's pollinating them, but is a really cool on an evolutionary standpoint, because if you have like a grove of baobabs, you, as a single baobab, would rather have your flower be pollinated by a different tree than your own flowers, because that's going to increase genetic diversity, all that good stuff. So each tree will only have a couple flowers to ensure that the pollinators have to move from tree to tree in order to pollinate them. So,
right.
Yeah,
that's cool.
It's crazy what trees have to do to survive in, like, you know, a grassland.
Yeah, no kidding. It's crazy in general, the things that plants can do to even control stuff like self-pollination.
Yeah.
But then adding in this extra like dimension of, being in this setting. Mm-hmm. It's so cool.
So cool. So I mentioned that there is one baobab species in Australia. In Australia, it's known as the boab. Don't know why.
boab.
Australians just always have to have different names for everything. But it's known as the boab. So not only is there controversy on, are these landscapes with boababs savannas? Are they forests? Are they grasslands? Who knows? We know. But there's a lot of controversy on how in the world the boab got to Australia. And,
yeah.
like how? It's so far. It's like 11,000 kilometers or something like that between Australia and like Madagascar or Africa. Insane. It's so much space. So much just open ocean. And there's kind of two different ideas on how this happened. One would be that, people brought it along with them as they moved out of Africa, which makes sense. This tree, again, is very important spiritually, but also just as a really amazing resource for food and shelter. But looking at the genetics of these trees, it suggests that the boab was there before people were.
Ooh. Okay, this is fun. This is spicy. I'm into it.
So, if that is true, how? Like, it doesn't make any sense. How? And the only other, like, semi-logical thing that I could find was that the fruit that are full of seeds, obviously, just kind of floated over there.
I love it.
And then a lot of other scientists are like, there's no way the fruit would get waterlogged and it would sink and the seeds inside would be destroyed. There's no way. And then the floating seed scientists are like, well, maybe there was like a really big storm and so it like floated over there on like a raft of debris, and maybe since it was a storm, the water was moving really quickly, so it really wasn't in the water that long. And then other people are like, okay, but that's kind of a reach. And it is, but
also it got there somehow, guys.
Yeah, like, I mean, because, also, we know for a fact that the boab got to Australia after Gondwana split up, so the supercontinent Gondwana. So we know that it wasn't just a matter of, like, animals or anything, like, dispersing the seeds. We know that for a fact.
Right.
So it got there after Australia was already, an island and way far removed from Africa. So.
Oh, that's exciting.
Yeah. After Gondwana broke up, but before humans, how did it get there?
Yeah.
And
I mean, it sounds like the floating fruit scientists have some ideas.
Yes.
Even if it's a stretch, it's like, hey, life finds a way. Sometimes
there we go.
things that are weird happen.
But yeah, literally we don't know. There's no real, like, we don't know. There's just a bunch of hypotheses out there. I even saw one that was like, maybe because in all of our stories of like Aboriginal culture on Australia, the boab has always been there. But in all of our stories in Africa, the boab has always been there. So it's like, did it originate in Australia and then move to Africa?
Yeah.
We don't know.
We don't know. Oh, that's so exciting.
Yeah. So lots of mystery in the boabab genus. Lots of weird things going on. Nobody knows what's going on. And that's okay. It just means that we have future questions to answer later.
I think it's not okay. Well, I mean, it's not okay if nobody finds the answers, but we do need the answers, especially because it's so weird. And it's honestly kind of shocking to me that we don't know more.
Yeah, same.
Because of how, like, culturally significant these trees are and, like, iconic and unique. I don't know. Yeah.
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 It's wild. This was the rabbit hole that I ran down, was like, boabs in Australia. I don't know. So, yeah.
Yeah.
No regrets, because it is fascinating.
It is absolutely fascinating. And we need to curb our tree hatred a little bit, so it was a good detour for us personally to take.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I agree. But yeah, that's Madagascar and the boabab tree, which also somehow wraps in Australia. but we don't know how.
Thank you for sharing that. That was not at all what I expected, and as usual, just beautifully mind-blowing.
I'm so glad. And thanks again, Brandon, for the episode suggestion and the continued Grassland love. Sorry, It took so today, when we're recording this, is exactly 4 months since I said Madagascar episode coming soon.
Did you really?
So,
okay, that's so funny. We're pretty bad about that.
Has it really been kind of soon?
It is kind of soon, I guess, in the grand scheme of things. How have we been doing this podcast that long?
I don't know, man. It's wild.
Well, hey, we got to it in less than a year, so I think that's kind of a victory.
I think so, too.
Also coming soon, Pleistocene Park.
Ooh, I'm so excited. You have no idea.
Okay. Well, if that's all, then I guess all we have left to do is say thanks to all of our people for listening to The Best Biome. As always, if you enjoyed this episode, please share and consider leaving us a review on Podchaser or Apple Podcasts. It really helps us out a lot. Follow us on Twitter, and you know how to contact us. All the links in the description. And that's it. So, yeah. Thanks, Nicole, and we'll see you guys next time.
Honestly, I'm kind of disappointed in myself because when I think of Madagascar animals, I only really think of forest species like lemurs. But also, how many of these forest species are actually savanna species, simply being called forest species? Like, I was looking at, animals of Central Highlands, and there's tenrecs that only live in the Central Highlands of Madagascar. But if the Central Highlands of Madagascar are actually savannas and therefore grasslands,
it's not a forest species!
Our tenrecs
are a savanna species. They're grasslands. Yeah. Dude, what? Yeah. Hang on, are tenrecs only found there?
No, it's like one or two specific species. They're found like everywhere.
I was just double checking.
But
dang! That is some earth-shattering revelations, though. Like, we seriously need to reevaluate how we classify those animals, too.
Yes. Grassland erasure. It's real.
Grassland erasure. Oh, the most barren and devastating landscape to ever set eyes upon. No. No. It's beautiful. Stop it.